Thank you to Camera on Campus, who is collaborating with us on this webinar. So today we're going to talk about combating anti-Semitism and understanding your legal rights on campus. The main topics that we're going to discuss today is how the hate crimes are clearly rising, especially with anti-Semitism. We're going to talk about what defines anti-Semitism, who decides they can define it. There's a lot of organizations and clubs, especially on campus, that are targeting Jewish students as well as contributing to anti-Semitism. So we're also going to discuss that. We're also going to talk about the legal information, Title VI and viewpoint discrimination, and then how individuals are able to take action and fight back. How can you handle anti-Semitism on campus? So I just want to make it clear that if you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute and interrupt. There will be time at the end for questions, but if there's something specific, please feel free. It's an open conversation. So firstly, what does the Zachor Legal Institute do? We are a legal think tank. We do research and activism in the Jewish and Israel sphere. So we operate in the governmental, commercial, and university environments. And in the last year or so, we started doing Zionists on Campus. This is a project that solely focuses on the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activity on campuses. So what does Zionists on Campus do? After speaking to tons of students across the United States, we found that there is a very hostile environment for students. I myself was a Temple University graduate in 2017, and of course I felt anti-Semitism throughout my college experience, from apartheid week to kids actually being assaulted on campus. And that's what drove me to actually get involved with the Zachor Legal Institute and begin advocating for Jewish students' rights on campus. So after we spoke to all these students, and with my personal experience, we thought that the best idea was to provide more resources to already existing organizations such as Camera on Campus, SSI, Hillel. We want to help those students as well as individual students. So what we're doing is we're conducting projects. We're a resource, our website's a resource, and if there's ever issues, and we'll get into that later, we're also somewhere that you can report those issues. Some of you are actually our interns already, and you know that we ask our students to run for those governmental positions, to write articles for the newspaper, to expose the double standards of the administrations that they have towards, let's just say, pro-Israel students and anti-Israel students. And then we also assist students that are dealing with legal problems on campus. So if there's any discrimination or if there's a violation of Title VI, we sit in with students and speak to their administrations. We write letters. We're there to help students. That's our goal, our mission, our sole purpose. So let's get to the good stuff. This slide, please feel free to speak up and say your opinion. So today we see the squad. And we have SJP, and we have the BDS movement, and we have white supremacists in the United States. And no one wants to be labeled anti-Semitic. I apologize for the sound, by the way. I'm in Tel Aviv, and it's a little bit loud. So let me know if you have problems hearing. Anyways, all of these people have one thing in common, is that they do not want to be labeled as anti-Semitic. However, they continue to spread lies and misinformation about Israel and the Jews. So the question is, who should define anti-Semitism? Shouldn't it be the Jews? Should it be somebody else? Does anyone have any opinions on that want to speak up and talk about that? Nina, I see your hands raised. Do you want to speak?
Sure. Yeah, I think that it's important that Jewish people define anti-Semitism because every time someone non-Jewish or external groups are defining what Jewish people are or things that concern the Jewish community, it can be, it's not fair that Jewish people don't get to kind of determine things in their own culture or speak for themselves. So it is colonization because Jewish people need to be like a self-sustaining group.
Great, thank you, Nina. Exactly. So Jewish people, in our opinion, deserve the right to define what anti-Semitism is. Zachor Legal Institute, we follow the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And one of the questions we have is, why do people refuse to accept this definition? Does anyone want to say anything about that, or anyone else have an opinion that they'd like to share?
Yeah, so I could share on that. I know, especially from personal experience, a lot of times student governments, for example, or just anti-Israel groups refuse to accept IRA because the definition, although it's not binding, it's a tool for identifying and combating anti-Semitism, and it also includes a bunch of examples of the different manifestations of anti-Semitism. And because so many people just politicize anti-Semitism into pro-Israel, pro-Palestine thing, they don't really like to support those examples because a lot of them deal with like the term Zionism and labeling Israel as a colonizer, for example. So because it's so politicized, I think a lot of times people don't use the definition.
Definitely. Thank you. Nina, did you want to say something else?
Or yeah, I just want to add, I totally agree, because I totally think that it goes against their political agenda for sure. I think that one of the main things, I think also because they're anti-Semitic, that they do this, because a lot of the times I see that they just say like IRA is racist. It's like taking the freedom of speech away is like one of their like main arguments, because they're trying, it still like kind of seems to have that flavor of like framing Jewish people as like super overly powerful to take away their rights.
Definitely. Thank you for contributing. Okay, so we're gonna keep going. So let's talk about the IRA definition. I'm sure many of you are aware of it, but it's the only intergovernmental organization mandated to focus solely on Holocaust-related issues. We believe that this definition is important. It's something that we advocate for because we see that anti-Semitism is continuing to rise, and we want to take a leading role in combating it. But let's talk about what these examples are. So it's accepted by many countries throughout the world, as well as a variety of organizations. It's not accepted by every state in the US, but recently it has been adapted more throughout the United States. Specifically, the US State Department uses this definition as it's referred to in the presidential executive order. This happened when Trump was elected president. He agreed that the Title VI of civil rights violations at universities is added in this. So what this means is it's pointing out that the modern definition includes old age hatred of Jews with more contemporary hatred of Israel as a proxy for Jews. So this could be example as comparing what's going on in Israel to Nazi Germany, making those types of comparisons and holding Jews at a double standard in the eyes of Israel. So holding all Israeli citizens accountable for what their government is doing. It's a double standard. We don't do that to other countries. So that's basically what it is saying. It doesn't limit free speech. It just simply labels anti-Semitism as anti-Semitism. We're going to keep going. So let's talk about the rise in anti-Semitism. I'm sure everybody has read the news. Specifically, I picked this picture because this is a young man who was wearing an IDF shirt. It started a movement on social media, having other people wear their IDF shirts with pride. But unfortunately, he was attacked in Brooklyn. We're seeing this, especially in New York, that Jews are being physically attacked, but it's also happening all over the country. It's important to note that the American Jewish Committee took a poll of American Jews, and it said 1 out of every 4 Jewish person has been a victim of anti-Semitism, whether it's attacks, physical, remarks in person, or remarks online. So obviously this would result in 39% of people changing their behavior, whether that's concealing their identity or maybe not being vocal about the activities they do referring to Judaism because they're afraid to be publicly Jewish. So this chart we thought was specifically important because it shows the difference between the gap between American Jews and the general public on what they believe is a problem with anti-Semitism in the country. The question number one, is anti-Semitism a problem in the US today? You can see that 90% of American Jews do think it's a problem, and 60% of the general population doesn't really think it's a problem. That's a significant gap. The other question is, has anti-Semitism in the US increased in the past 5 years? The FBI had a report, the most hate crimes in the US were towards Jewish people. So it's a clear fact that there has been a rise in anti-Semitism, but still you can see there's a large gap with the general public not actually thinking that this is a problem. And we're going to send these slides to you after so you can have a better look at them. If you want to use them in your groups, if you want to use them on campus, we think this is important. So this picture is a Temple University student that happened this year. This picture I got off the web, the media, so it's public knowledge for everyone. She was a rowing student. She was on the rowing team. And her roommate took a picture of her and labeled it "I hate Jews" and sent it around campus. So not only was she her roommate, but she was also her teammate. And this is not the first incident of anti-Semitism that they had while being roommates. This girl actually reported that she was openly Jewish. She would go to synagogue. She had Jewish books in her room, and that her roommate vandalized her books, would make fun of her for going to synagogue. The student felt very, very uncomfortable, but this picture specifically was the last straw. She reported it to her rowing coach and the school administration. Her rowing coach was apathetic, said that this was not a big deal because the rowing team was more important than this girl's safety. The student actually left the school. She withdrew from being at Temple University. The administration still will not put out a statement in what actually happened as a punishment to the student who took this picture. This is old age anti-Semitism. This isn't new. This doesn't have anything to do with Israel. This is specifically a targeted anti-Semitic incident. And that is what I think is increasingly scary and concerning for the younger generation. The Brandeis Center found that 65% of openly Jewish students felt unsafe on campus, and 50% of them hid their identity as well. This is a clear example to why that is happening. 1 out of every 3 Jewish college students personally experienced anti-Semitism, and this is a survey that was taken by ADL and Hillel. Referring back to the student, we had the opportunity to speak with the mother of the student, and it's just a really sad thing that this is kind of what it's come to. But it's important that people speak up, and we'll get into those ways and how you can maybe do more than just legal action before something like this happens on campus. So this is another interesting case that we are working on right now. We are keeping pressure on USC to address constructively on the repeated anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist incidents on campus. These are actual tweets that were produced by a graduate student, senator, that she posted on her Twitter account. The administration has really made no statement about it. There's not a lot that's going on. And that's a real problem, because this is clearly anti-Semitic. It's also intimidating. It's also, it's violence. And there's nothing that's going on with the administration, which is frightening. Something else that we're working on right now is university foreign funding. I personally think this is really important. It's something that I wasn't aware of when I was a student, and had I been aware of it, I think that it would have changed my mindset a bit on why certain professors or classes seem like they have an agenda. So under Section 117 of the Higher Education Act 1965, American universities are required to disclose any gifts of $250,000 from a foreign source. That's a ton of money. First of all, let's be clear about that. It's a ton of money. Anything lower than that is still a ton of money that doesn't need to be reported. However, we're investigating what is the influence and the conditions then why is there more than $1 billion of Qatar funding? And how does that influence Israel activity on campus? So we filed a Freedom of Information request with Texas A&M for information on these Qatari gifts. Rather than provide this information of where this money is going to, the university denied the request, altered Qatar, which filed a lawsuit and attempted to prevent the Texas Attorney General from releasing the information. So I pose a question to the students here is, do we think that students deserve to know this? Do we think parents deserve to know this? Do you think that there are incentives, conditions, and influence for these specific projects? Does anyone have any opinion on this or anything they would like to contribute? Alrighty, so we'll keep going. Oh, Nina. Nina, would you like to say something?
Sure. I think that it's absolutely important that we know about money that's being funded to the university or what it's being used for. I mean, like, I think that probably for many things we know a lot of the time. So why shouldn't we know if it has stuff to do with the Jewish? It's just unfair. I think it's a double standard that we can't know about things that impact the Jewish community and funding when we know about so many other things, like where I see all the time, like, oh, we're now putting more funding for commuter students. Commuter students are underfunded, or transfer community is underfunded. But if we need to know money that can like threaten Jewish students, or just any money in general that's going for activity on campus, we have to know what's happening in general, but we do already know.
Definitely. Thank you, Nina. Okay, so what is considered anti-Semitism on campus? I'm not going to go through all of them. We will send you these slides, but obviously defacing property. I know there's some campuses here who experienced ripping down mezuzahs. That's considered anti-Semitic. Targeting Jewish students and student government, not publishing Israel pieces in the newspaper, anything that's connected to terrorism. So the school of San Francisco University, for example, when they tried to have the Palestinian Liberation Front, one of their active members, come and speak on Zoom, that's anti-Semitic. It's intimidating, it's harassment, it's not okay. Anything academic boycotts or food boycotts. So for example, when I was a student at Temple University, I had an incredibly hard time getting approved to study abroad in Israel. However, when I said that I was going to study in East Jerusalem and study Arabic, then I was allowed to go study. I didn't realize that that was, I would say that's anti-Semitic, that I wasn't allowed to go do a Jewish program at Tel Aviv University, but I was allowed to go to East Jerusalem and take an Arabic program. And I had to go and I had to explain to them, why did I want to go to Israel? Why was it so important? And later on, I found out that the professor there was anti-Israel, and it was clear, but I didn't know these things as a student. So those are examples, and we're going to send these to you. We have infographics later. Does anyone have any questions so far? No. Okay, we're going to keep going. So a few ways that you can combat anti-Semitism on campus. Many of you, I think, are freshmen. So what you can do, or sophomores, if you're still living in the dorms, is you can speak to your RAs, and you can actually host events that have to do with Israel education. You don't need to do it through Hillel or another organization. You can, we support that completely, but you can actually go and do it within your dorm and have a dorm event like that. You can speak out against anti-Semitic jokes and slurs. This is especially important because, of course, it's awkward to tell another student that what you're saying isn't funny, or what you're saying makes me uncomfortable, what you're saying is anti-Semitic. It's not easy to do that, but if you keep allowing these anti-Semitic jokes to keep happening, you're also perpetuating the problem. But aside from that, you can fundraise money, have big sales, things within your sororities, your fraternities, things like that. All right, social media seems to be a huge problem right now. Social media companies are not required to shut down any forms of anti-Semitism. You can report, but they're not obligated. Twitter was actually reported to be the largest platform that had the most anti-Semitism in 2021. So ways to challenge anti-Semitism online. There's nothing legal that can happen online, unfortunately, but we do see that the biggest influencers like the Hadid sisters, different political figures tend to post things that are anti-Semitic. So what can you do? You can create your own content with factually correct information. You can reshare from credible influencers and sources, which we can also provide for you a list of those. You can share articles, you can send letters and emails, and you can do what's the most tiring thing, I think, report and report and report. And maybe you won't get an answer, but I personally think the best way that you can inform people that is in your network and your community is by resharing and creating content. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he's going to start to talk about the legal aspects of combating anti-Semitism on campus.
Okay, I think I've unmuted myself. Thank you, Lizzie, and thank you, Camera, by the way, for cooperating with us and presenting this. It's very important, and we appreciate your solidarity on this. So the first thing is that I'm going to go a little bit different from what the slides are showing, only because the slides are really well done. They have a lot of information in them, and certain things are self-explanatory on their face. So like the First Amendment, viewpoint discrimination is very well covered by the slides. I'm more than happy to answer questions. And if you have any specific situations that you'd like to go over, please always feel free to reach out to me individually, and I can talk to you about this. But the First Amendment really is, it's self-explanatory. The bigger issue is Title VI, because there are nuances to that that are not apparent from the face of the law. So the first thing is that Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, national origin, or color in any federally funded program without regard to whether the institution is public or private. And pretty much every university receives some form of federal funding, whether it's a Pell Grant or a student loan or research funding, and that's all you need to be subject to Title VI. So, you know, obviously an institution like UCLA is subject to Title VI. Also, though, Duke is subject to Title VI. All sorts of other private universities are subject to Title VI. So don't let the fact that somebody may say, well, we're not a public school, so we don't have to abide by Title VI, fool you. It's not the truth. On its face, Title VI doesn't apply to religion. And that's why a lot of people will say, well, you know, that's a Jewish thing. Title VI is only race, national origin, or color, and being Jewish is none of those. And that's not the way that courts have interpreted this. Courts have interpreted Title VI to include shared ethnicity characteristics. So when it comes to Jews and Zionists, we have a situation where we're being attacked because of the group dynamics. The people look at us and not say, well, you know, you worship God, you're a monotheist, and you believe in the Torah. That's not what's going on. It's more about you are a Jew, and Jews as part of this cabal or this, you know, organization or this group that influences things is something pernicious to us, and so we're going to attack you. That's what it's meant to combat. So again, the point is that it's not necessarily about you as a practicing Jew of the religion. It's you as the ethnic identity as a Jew, and that's really an important distinction to make, because the other side definitely dwells on that. As Lizzie explained earlier, discrimination against Jewish students who are Zionists is now explicitly prohibited under Title VI as a form of anti-Semitism, and it's done this way through the combination of the IHRA definition plus the executive order that required the Department of Education to take a look at specific examples when looking at complaints of anti-Semitism. And so that also is something that has not, you know, the other side always says, well, you know, Zionist is a political ideology. It has nothing to do with race, color, or national origin, so it doesn't apply. Not true. So the other issue that needs to be focused on is that not all anti-Semitic activity is prohibited discrimination. It has to be, and this is a real key point here, it has to be pervasive or severe anti-Semitism. So, for example, that little post that somebody put on Instagram about I hate Jews, on its own, that probably is not a Title VI violation, because it was from a student in her personal Instagram account. It had nothing to do with the university. And it also it wasn't a one-time thing. Actually, we know that this student had been subject to a pattern of discrimination, but for Title VI purposes, you also need a connection to the university. So if it were a university program where students were assaulting other students and saying, I hate Jews, this person is a Jew, maybe it's a Title VI issue. But the bottom line is that it has to be something that interferes with your right, and you have a right to participate in education. And if it rises to that level, then it becomes a Title VI issue. So for example, we had a student in 2018 who was at UCLA. He was complaining about the Students for Justice in Palestine group that was going to have a national conference at UCLA. And he said, how can this be? They regularly come after me and other Zionists. They want to, for example, ban me from having a table in the Quad. They rip Israeli flags out of my hand. The things that they say threaten me as a Zionist on campus. They say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's a call for genocide. And so we talked, the first thing that we did was we said, okay, let's talk to UCLA. We'll talk to the general counsel. We'll see how this is happening, why they are allowing this. Unfortunately, the UCLA administration, they basically said it's free speech and we're not going to stop it. And even though they were wrong on that, we had to allow them to just go through the process. They went through it. They talked to SJP. They said, you can't violate certain rights. You can't discriminate. They said they're not going to discriminate. And of course, everything about that conference was about anti-Zionism. It was about threatening Jewish students. They wouldn't even allow Zionist students to see what was going on. And so there were some people who were able to sneak in. We got information from Freedom of Information requests. And we ended up filing a complaint with the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, and it now is in the process of being investigated. So I think that's a good example of how you have to have not only a university component. So here, the university component was that they provided funding for the conference. They gave facilities to the participants. They even provided security for the participants. And that is enough. That's all you need to have the university component. They were federally funded. And so that allowed us to have this Title VI complaint. Problem is that Title VI is absolutely selectively enforced. On its face, it applies to a number of things. It should be very apparent that, for example, the calls for boycotts against Israelis, that right there it should be prima facie. It should be a national origin discrimination complaint on its face. Unfortunately, though, the Department of Education, as with everything in government, is highly politicized. So it hasn't been a focus for them. But since the executive order, it has become a focus. So there is hope. And we just want you to be aware that the Department of Education is increasingly focused on anti-Semitism and particularly anti-Zionism. So we encourage you, anytime you have anything that may look like it could be subject to Title VI, just reach out and we will tell you whether we think that there's a case here or not. But the key is that once you reach out to us, you also have to reach out to the university administration. You have to let them know what's going on, because Title VI depends on the university first knowing something is going on in terms of discrimination, and second, not taking action. So if they don't know, they can't take action. And we've had this situation before where at the intake stage at the Office of Civil Rights, they'll say, what did you do to inform the university of this problem? And the student says, well, I didn't want to say anything. I was afraid of retaliation. I was afraid of being attacked. That's a deal killer for the Department of Education. They will say, well, then you can't really blame the university for this. Second of all, universities often will misinform students. They will say anti-Semitism, these anti-Zionism segment of anti-Semitism is political speech, and we cannot, under the First Amendment, prohibit that. We can't take action. Everybody has a right to their opinion politically. And so when these students, like Students for Justice in Palestine, are saying things like, Israel's an apartheid state. That's political speech. That's not anti-Semitism. And again, they're wrong, because Title VI is just one of many federal anti-discrimination statutes, and there's also state anti-discrimination statutes. And when it comes to speech that infringes upon other people's fundamental rights, like your right to an education or your right to protest against the government, that cannot be that cannot be protected by the First Amendment. You do not have a First Amendment right to engage in discrimination, and that's why courts uphold things like Title VI and other laws. So if you approach the university and they say, look, this is political speech and we're not going to do anything about it, well, again, please come to us. We'll be happy to work on your behalf with the administration. But also, don't be afraid to tell them this is not a matter of political speech any more than being racist against Blacks or against the LGBTQ community is protected speech. In some cases it may be, but it's not a blanket sort of prophylactic against First Amendment speech. So just please remember that do not be swayed when the administration says that they can't do anything about it. They can, they just don't want to. So the next thing is that, let's say that you've gone to the administration, you've said, I'm being discriminated against. I feel that there's a hostile environment here on campus. Please do something about it. And they say, well, we can't do anything about it. This is not going to be something that we act on. Your first course of action should be to start documenting, because again, the Office of Civil Rights depends on evidence, and they depend on multiple sources of evidence. So the more that you can present to us that we can then present to them, the better chance we have of winning this case. So you need to write down what happened, who did it, what did they say, where was it, when was it. If you can do this with video or pictures, even better. But the more that you can document, the better off you are. And I think that there's something on this subsequent slide that gives you some information about where to send reports. It's report@zacorlegal.org. So you can always feel free to contact us, even if you don't want to be identified. We will act on it. We will get back to you if you use a pseudonym in an email account. We don't care. So please feel free to do that. So the final thing that I'm going to talk about is, let's say that we get to the point in Title VI where university has done nothing. We've told you we think that there's a violation of Title VI. We can take action. The next step is that you need to be willing to move forward with the Title VI complaint, and we will handle everything for you. We'll do the paperwork. Obviously no charge. We'll represent you. We'll be counsel throughout the entire proceeding. And we will file the complaint with the Department of Education in a way that is best designed to get them to act on it. Once we file that complaint, it usually is about a month before the Department of Education will come back to us and say, we've received your complaint. We believe that either there is a violation or there isn't a violation. If they say, we don't see enough here to see that there's a violation, they will end they will not even go to an investigation. They'll end the complaint at that point, and then we have to consider what the next step is. If they do say that we think that there's enough here for us to start an investigation, at that point, then they will want to interview you and interview any witnesses that you have, anyone else who experienced this as well. It's usually about a 1 hour phone interview or Zoom interview that they go through. They'll ask you basic questions about what happened. How did it make you feel? How does this constitute a hostile environment that prevented you from having, exercising your right to an education? Very basic information, and they will keep this information confidential. So that's something that a lot of students are concerned about, because the other side is very vocal. They know how to use the heckler's veto, and they are known to attack anybody who stands up for their rights on the Zionist side. The good news is that OCR from the Department of Education will not disclose that information to the public, and they only provide information to the university being investigated to the extent needed, and they tell the university you cannot release this information. If you do, you are subject to legal remedies that the student has, and we will enforce those against you. So the point being that don't worry about confidentiality or retaliation, because you can always stop the process at any time if you're uncomfortable with it, but the Department of Education also is very firm with the universities once a complaint starts the investigation phase that this has to be, the student has to be protected. So that is something that prevents a lot of students from just taking action with the Department of Education in the first place. And you shouldn't be concerned with that. And we will, like I said, we will always be ready to just terminate everything in terms of the complaint if you feel uncomfortable with it. And there's no repercussions from that. It just ends, the complaint is dismissed, nobody knows about it, and your participation is over at that point. So assuming though that the Department of Education has interviewed you, the investigation begins, it then takes about a year or more for them to complete the investigation. It's all behind the scenes. It's all about interviewing the university, the people who have come forward as witnesses, collecting the evidence, making the determinations. And like, for example, the 2018 UCLA campus event that we complained about is still an investigation that's going on. We continue to add more information. They continue to investigate, and that's now, like, I think 3 years since the investigation started, and that's not unusual. So it's a long process, but it's the most important process available because it's the federal government. There's no fees involved, and once they do something, it has the imprimatur of the federal government requiring a university to take remedial action. And that's usually what happens, is they will tell the university, you have a problem with allowing anti-Zionism on campus. You have to now implement a training seminar. You have to maybe even exclude groups like SJP from campus because they deal in nothing but anti-Semitism. Many other things could be a remedy that they suggest. But that's the important thing, is that as opposed to like going to court on your own, where maybe you get money, maybe you get something else, we have here a tool that has the federal government going in and putting a stop to this. So your rights will be protected. That's something that really needs to be reinforced here to make sure that you feel comfortable with the process. And I'm just looking through my notes to see, okay, so one last thing, and I'll end with this, that, it's often the case that universities respond to the loudest voices. And I'm not saying that you should file, frivolous complaints. You shouldn't file a frivolous complaint. But even if it's a complaint that may or may not have enough to just justify a Title VI investigation, simply going to the university and having us or any other legal group involved sends a message to the university. And we've seen universities start to realize that they cannot just allow SJP and others to continue to run roughshod and without limitation on campus. They will then start looking into this, even if we don't end up with a Title VI investigation, even if we don't end up with a First Amendment complaint, it raises it to the level of they want, a lot of this is about who's going to make us spend the most money and time. And if the Jewish students simply are silent, they're going to say, well, the Palestinian supporters are always, knocking on our door, so we have to respond to them. So again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's the most important first step that you can take, and we are always here to help you. One other thing, I'm sorry, I lied. So IHRA, Lizzie had mentioned something about the questions that others have raised about IHRA and saying it's censorship, it's a political agenda. Just so that you know, IHRA is not legally binding. And to the extent it's been incorporated into things like Title VI, it's as an advisory. So what happens is, and what the executive order does, is it gives the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education sort of guidelines for what to look for when they make an independent determination as to whether something has risen to the level of a hostile environment on campus. So simply saying, I hate Israel, a lot of people say IHRA prevents me from doing that. Absolutely not. You can say I hate Israel all day long on campus, but if you start saying it and you deprive someone else of other rights, a Zionist student of their rights, then it may rise to that level. And that's what IHRA does, is it now gives the Department of Education firm sort of examples of when it's not just about religion, but it's also about the ethnic identity of Jews as an ethnic group. And one last thing that I do want to note is that, we're facing a very well-funded, well-organized opponent. Anti-Semitism is not grassroots. And this actually goes back to what Lizzie was talking about with our investigation into Qatar. We thought that they were providing funding, that they were the deep pockets behind a lot of these campus anti-Zionist groups. And the fact that Qatar has gone to court to prevent us from seeing what the documents are that Texas A&M has gives some legitimacy to that belief that there is a multi-billion-dollar effort here from foreign actors, foreign governments, and foreign organizers to assault your rights on campus. And so, when people say, we're just trying to protect the civil rights, we're a small group, we're grassroots, it's not true. And that's why groups like us and Brandeis and Lawfare exist, is to provide a counterpoint to that. And, we're not well funded, but we are powerful and we can help you. And that for sure is the last thing I have to say. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I think this is going to lead into any questions that any students have. Anything that Mark mentioned. Yes, Nina, do you want to unmute?
Yes, please. I was wondering, could you please clarify what it means that to be involved in the education process, that we have a right to be involved in the education process as much as other students? Does that involve systemic administrative things, or does it only involve like learning in the classroom?
Thanks, Nina, and it's good to see you. Yeah, no, it's way more than that. It's, this is one of those things, it's a facts and circumstances test, and that's unfortunately something that lawyers like to say a lot, but it's absolutely the case, is that when you have an issue and you go to the Department of the Department of Education, they will look at the entirety of what has happened. And so for example, if it's a curriculum that just focuses, and I think that, Nina, you've seen this, where it focuses on demonizing Jews and to say that, Israel is an illegitimate entity and that Jews don't have a homeland, they're not a people, that obviously can impact you. It could mean that there's another legal term, and it's called chilling your rights. So it may cause you to not want to speak up in class. It may cause you to sort of want to drop out of the class because you feel I'm not a legitimate entity, I'm being attacked, or I don't have a right to be here. At that level, then it's definitely a hostile environment, and it has interfered with your right to an education. If it's just something like a teacher, for example, putting up a Palestinian flag in class, probably not enough to constitute the hostile environment that the Department of Education can act on. So again, there's a spectrum. There's no bright line test for it, but if you see a pattern of things and it is causing you to have the kind of distress or the kind of feeling of being an other on campus, then we can act. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, I just had a quick follow-up. So like,
Sure.
if, for example, I don't want to participate in class, but what if, for example, I don't want to file complaints or I don't want to filing complaints because, for example, I went to Ombuds the other day to ask for advice, and they were not disclosing all information to me. I was going to talk to you about it later, but like that kind of discourages me from going to Ombuds, which is like kind of like a mediator center on campus.
Right.
Is that also included?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not just classroom things, it's the entire educational experience and the entire thing of campus life. And it's an important point that you raised, Nina, because a lot of things happen outside of the classroom, and it could be things, we had that situation at UCLA where SJP and other anti-Zionist groups were following students, they were harassing them, and it had nothing to do with the classroom, but it had to do with the fact that Jewish students were on campus, and they were not afraid of saying that they're Jewish students and Zionists, and they were prevented from even doing things like walking across the quad in peace. That's one of those things that we can, that we can help you with, and it doesn't always require Title VI. It could just be getting a lawyer's letter from us to the administration saying this is unacceptable. This is a prelude to legal action. If you don't do anything about it, we will take legal action, whether it's First Amendment, whether it's California state anti-discrimination laws, whether it's Title VI.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Nina. Mike, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Mark and Lizzie, for wonderful discussion and for leading us this Sunday. It was actually very enlightening, especially on the topic of funding, because I wasn't thinking of that myself.
Yeah.
That's a great call. So anyway, so my question is, have you seen any instances where students were impacted by admissions to other academic programs like a second degree or a graduate program within the same university because of anti-Zionism, especially where anti-Israel instances have been involved?
Thanks, Mike. The answer to that is we haven't seen that, and I'm just guessing at this point, but I think that we wouldn't see that mostly because it would be a very opaque process unless the university said we're not admitting Zionists. And so that's one of those things where they could have attributed it to grades or extracurricular activity or the fact that diversity in general. And so, no, we haven't seen that. I'm sure that it's going on, though. And if we ever were presented with such a case, I think that would be one of the most, deliberate instances of a violation of Title VI I could ever imagine, is to not even be allowed into a program. But no, we haven't seen that yet. I know it happens, though. And it probably happens as well with hiring decisions at universities. And we actually just had, within the last month or two, a conversation with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission of the United States, which administers a sort of an analog to Title VI called Title VII, which is all about discrimination in hiring. And we told them, we know that the academic boycott is probably going to result in Israelis or Zionist applicants not being allowed to have a job. And they said, if you see this happening, come to us. We need to know about it and we'll take action. But again, nobody ever really says we're not hiring you because you're a Zionist. So we have to piece it together. But it's a great question, and we know it's happening. And we would love to talk to anybody if they feel that this has happened to them.
Thank you, Mike, for your question. Nina, did you have another question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, this is kind of relaying off of Mike's question. I was wondering, what about like if you're already in an organization, but we can't participate in important events or have like the full experience of the organization because they're constantly organizing events on Shabbat?
I think that also is Title VI. And that's actually very traditional anti-Semitism. I mean, that has nothing to do, obviously, with Zionism. And I mean, I think that it is a Title VI issue, and it could be a number of other legal issues as well, dealing with the freedom of religion. So, we would have to look specifically at what was going on, but yeah, there's a remedy for that as well. I mean, and I know that in the past, that has been one of the ways that anti-Semites have gotten around prohibitions, is they do things, rather than saying we're not going to allow Jews in, they schedule things for times when they know religious Jews couldn't participate. And so it's de facto discrimination. It's definitely an example, though, Nina.
Thank you. And I had another question. So about other thing, like for example, in the UCLA Discrimination Prevention Office, they were telling us that they will not add ethnicity as like a thing to check off like discrimination on basis of ethnicity, that they do basis of national origin group, because the ethnic group is within national origin group. So is it allyship to say like Jewish people are a nation of origin group as opposed to saying Jewish people are ethnic group?
Again, it would depend on what situation it was being said in, but I mean, it's an unusual thing to say because the guidance from the Department of Education, the executive order, the case law, the scholarship says that that it's a shared ethnicity that is being attacked here. So I don't know why UCLA would say that Jews are not an ethnicity when all of the documents and all the scholarship says, I mean, there's a question as to whether Jews are a race, but as an ethnicity, I think it's pretty well settled as a legal matter that it is. I mean, otherwise there wouldn't be a basis for saying shared ethnicity. Attacks on shared ethnicity is a violation of the national origin prong of Title VI. I don't know why they would say that. I mean, again, I think that this is an example of the university simply going with, the loud voice that demanded that be said and not having pushback from the other side.
Right, because I thought that I thought at first that it was kind of good because if they're saying that the Jewish ethnic characteristics are part of the Jewish nation of origin, so that even if you marry somebody Jewish, that like you can be targeted for anti-Semitism or like discrimination against Jewish, or like anti-Semitic discrimination if you marry somebody Jewish, or like if you go to halal, even if you're like not even Jewish and stuff. That but because they use it says, but for some reason like the ethnic stuff has to be contingent on like a national group, which I thought was good because, or I thought it was good because then like it like is maintaining like Zionism, but then at the same time I feel like people who don't know the terminology wouldn't be able to check off on the form ethnicity for Jewish people.
It's a tough question, but the national origin test really is about, you could say that I'm an Israeli and that's national origin discrimination. Well, there are Israeli Arabs, there are Israeli Jews, there's Israeli Christians, Druze, people who have no affiliation whatsoever. And so an example of national origin discrimination on its face is we won't hire Israelis, and they just simply refuse to hire anyone from Israeli, whether it's Jewish or not. The shared ethnicity is where you start getting into Zionism because, for example, a Muslim Arab does not, who is an Israeli, does not have a shared ethnicity with other Jews. They are definitely Israeli though, and national origin discrimination could affect them if somebody said, I'm just never going to hire an Israeli. But that wouldn't be a case of it wouldn't be a case of anti-Semitism under Title VI because they are not part of the shared ethnicity of Jews, which tracks back thousands of years.
Okay, thank you, Nina, for your question. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any last questions before we wrap things up? Okay, so thank you all for taking the time out of your Sunday to come and listen and discuss. It's very important, and you're the voices on campus. This is how things, I think, will change is through educating yourselves and your peers. So big thank you for you guys for coming. Any issues you have, report at zachorlegal.org. We can help you speak to administrations. We can help you if there's an issue on campus. Please document any events. So I know that Apartheid Week is happening right now. It's crucial that you document anything. Take a video with your phone, write down exactly how it made you feel, what the environment was, all of that stuff that we had posted before. We're going to send you all of this information so you can read it over at your own time. And then if you have any questions, you can always contact me, Lizzie at zionistoncampus.org. We're always looking for new students to work with. If you want to get involved even further, please contact us. But anything you have, we're here for you. And thank you again so much for participating.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great Sunday. I'm going to end this now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you so
Bye,
much.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.